Let's now go into some rendering. So let's choose a nice frame we want to use as our primary mode. Somewhere we're getting a nice figure. This is nice. Okay, that's pretty. Gotta give full credit to this tutorial here for creating the shader. I'm essentially doing a similar thing with this particle setup and with a certain amount of mission, but I'm gonna reverse it. Whereas this has the setup go where it becomes a higher emission value with a higher velocity, I actually want a higher emission value with less velocity, because that's what that's gonna allow you to do for something like this. Is it'll mean that all this like darker blue stuff in here where the body is going to be slightly brighter than the stuff that gets flung off. So you're going to get a little bit better definition on the body and the legs here that are like behind parts of these particles. For general reference, even if you're doing any actual liquid that has a mesh, you're going to want HDRI lighting. That's just going to make it look so much better than even just using point lights in an environment. So for now, let's just turn our environment down to black. I'll remember it, and let's go into creating these particles. So right now it's creating this liquid domain material here, but actually what we're going to do, we're going to instance an icosphere into each one of these points, which is going to give us a bit more control. So we get Shift A, mesh, icosphere, and then let's subdivisions down to 1, and then we can just move this down here. Let's just scale it down just a little bit, apply that scale, and we're just going to call you particle. We can take this and go into the particle settings here and render it instead as an object. Render this object particle. It's going to probably take a second. There we go. Go into the particle. New material. Let's just call it particle, viewport display amount, and set it something like 5%, honestly. That's gonna make this so much easier for right now. But what we do need is a particle info node. And then that's gonna give us, kind of see inherently here. Oh, well, okay, let's then take this and hit hide emitter. Hide emitter, there we go, okay. Now we can actually go into here, and you can see this is changing the value, it's just not really showing anything right now. So velocity as a vector is gonna sometimes be negative because there is a negative value that you can get to in the X, Y, and Z component. So the first thing we want to do, if we're using velocity as anything, is do a vector math and actually create an, oops, not normalize, but absolute this. If we do a color ramp, and that's just a basic white to black, but let's say we want it to be like, like maybe like a green and yellow, or maybe this can be a nice tealer color. This can be kind of muddier green. We'll play with these a little bit, but if we change this to HSV and this to far, and you're gonna get a lot of pre-color variation. But you'll see here that it's not, everything is pretty much lining up with this 0 value here. Actually, even if we add in something, it looks like it's not really doing anything. That is because we're in Eevee, and Eevee does not calculate. Interesting. So normally cycles, putting in cycles is gonna help us out here, but I think what the issue might be is, let's just set this to like 6 seconds. Sometimes there's a difference between what you see in the viewport and what you see in the final render. So let's just go ahead and do a render real quick and see if the color is any different. So in the viewport it's all green, and here you see, there we go. Let's see, like even if we go into render view here, does that help? That helps it. Oh, wow. Wow. Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. Let's see, if we just keep this multiplied at 1, it is green. If we multiply by 10, you get a lot more of that blue in there. 5, It's just those. All right, so let's just do 10. And let's actually reverse this. That's gonna keep the body this lighter blue here. So we want the body to be a little bit lighter. I do wonder, maybe we can do kind of a yellow here. Oh, that's kind of nice and natural. It's a little bit more simple, which I actually kind of like. But anyway, so you can see we have something here that's telling us the velocity. Now that we have a color, we can put this color into here. We also want it to make sure it emits. So before we forget, put the color into emission color. And then we can take another one of these, just copy it over, Alt, right click, drag, and this one we can use to control the emission strength. And we want it to actually, as it gets a higher velocity, which is going to be closer to 1 over here, we actually want it to be darker. So we'll set this nice dark color, and then early on we want it to be completely bright. So it doesn't completely matter that these are color tinted. What really matters here is just this value. That's really what it's reading here. So we can take this color and put it into emission strength. And then if we control shift click on this, we get some actual emission. And it does look a little bit dim. So why don't we take a math node and just multiply it by, what if we do 10? And then let's do ourselves a little bit of a favor, and to help with some of the lag, we'll go into camera and add in viewport display passport 2 and just fully crank it up. If we go back to our liquid domain, this will give us a little bit more free reign to increase the number of particles we see. So 50%. Oh, that's bright. Oh yeah, okay, so this is good because we need to definitely decrease the brightness. Let's just go to 100, let it be really laggy. Okay, so let's decrease this down to like 5. All right, that's a little better. So we definitely need to put a roof on here, is what I am realizing. Let's do some actual full renders. We can toggle on this, make sure this display tag is toggled on, and this way if we click on the liquid domain, toggle that off, it's not gonna show, but we can still adjust any of these values here because we have the particle separate. And let's just render it out, you know. Right now it's set to a time limit of 6 seconds. I don't generally like doing time limits. I mean, actually it's really useful for early on stuff, but let's just instead set the samples to like 100. We can go to advanced. Actually, light paths here is what we really want. And we know we're not going to need any transmission values. If you're new to this, I mean, the very basics for rendering something like this, I would just use a time limit, honestly, just depending on how long you have to render. But it can be really helpful just to keep a consistent noise pattern and to really tell what's necessary. Is just, we can go into light paths, and if we reduce this how many samples it's giving to the or how many bounces it's giving to the transmission values, that's going to henceforth then give more bounces to diffuse and glossy even when we are using this time limit function. For right now, just so I can really see how much I need this, let's just go in and I need to remember to also hide our guy here. So let's go into armature, and he is hidden. Okay, cool. So we'll just press F12. Render out a quick one. Still using denoise and all of that. Oh, but he is. Oh, it's because. Sorry, I disabled them in the viewport, but not the render. So let's disable in the render. But that's all keeps on the render. All that is all good. And then, all right, now we'll try. The other things that I'll do just for this render that we're going to do overnight, is I'll like to go into these view layer properties and just turn on, we're going to want, let's see, diffuse direct, indirect, glossy direct, indirect. We don't need transmission because we're not doing anything here. We don't need volume because we're not doing any volume here. And let's get emission, and let's just get ambient occlusion as well. Essentially, these are just different ways to view the render and see how noisy the render is, in particular diffuse and glossy. If there's any, Not always relevant for doing quick renders, but for full production stuff, like when I'm actually bringing this to a full quality level, I'll really want to hone in on these values and make sure these are specific to what is actually necessary to get rid of the noise. Right now, I mean, these are only like, I don't know, 35-second renders, so it's fine. So for rendering something like this, especially if it's just an overnight render, I generally like to think about how much time I have to render per frame, and then aim for that value roughly with these samples, and kind of get a good balance between efficient time, but then also what's necessary for the samples, because you don't want to overdo it if it's not necessary. So I have about 700 frames to render in 8 hours. So 8 hours times 60 is 480 minutes. Times 60 again is 28,000 seconds. No, we divide that by 700 and we get about 41 seconds per frame. So we're kind of in a ballpark here, at least for tonight's render. But I do want to make sure that we are getting, we aren't losing out on too much detail here. So let's just bump this up to 200, and I'll compare between the 100 and 200 and see, you know, see if there's much definition changes that are happening. All right, render just finished, 109, and if we're going back and forth, I'm pressing 1 and then 2 on the keyboard to switch between these two different images. You can see slot 1, slot 2. You can kind of see how giving it does give that better definition. So theoretically, the way I like to think about it is if we're rendering at 100 samples in this first image, we have to be okay with getting this much noise in between the frames on this, if you really zoom in. But if you're not zoomed in, like, the noise you see is really only in here, it seems. And we can maybe take a look. If that's the noise we're seeing, we can go to the combined and instead look directly at the noise for, here's the diffuse direct, indirect, glossy direct, glossy indirect. So yeah, you can see the glossy direct, it's all pretty dark here. What looks to be giving a lot more of this noise is diffuse direct, or actually in particular diffuse indirect. Like, this is really, really grainy. At least the other stuff is clamped down more. So let's increase the weight on diffuse here. Let's go from 4 up to 6, and that'll help that a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time kind of fine-tuning this right now, or maybe not even in the final one. It's with how good the Cycles denoiser is now. A lot of this is just, you know, little things that not everybody's gonna care about. So care about it however much you want, really. But let's just set this. For tonight, we do need it to something like 100. For a final render, we'll have to boost that up. This is also pretty nice, although we know that that's gonna lead for pretty dramatic fall off suddenly. So maybe there's a way to randomly select the particles and have them go translucent near the end here. Let's see. Maybe there is. If we go into shading, select the particles, do a random selection. So if we do add a color ramp here, let's see if we can just get a nice random selection of particles by bringing this in here, making it constant. And we can bring this white value in here. So we should be selecting, it's feeding a random value for each particle. Let's just make this an emission so we can really tell if it is actually picking the random particles, and render this out here. Some of these particles, you can see this one stays lit, whereas this one gets rendered as black. So that is exactly what we need, because what we are going to do is then take this random value and just slowly animate this position. So it starts off with everything being lit, and then suddenly it multiplies everything by this color ramp value by black here. So if we plug this in to, we don't need this emission anymore. We still want this connected, but we can make it a mix, a mix shader, and make this the factor of a mix shader between this and a trans. I always forget what the difference between translucent and transparent is. Let's try transparent, and then Let's bring the color up to here. And then let's just see, let's see what this looks like. So if we make sure we're at slot 7. So they're slowly disappearing. It's going to be a sudden disappearance. Well, actually, it might just be as simple as making this an ease value. And then slowly bringing this up over time. I think that should do it. Like, if we just render this right now. Or not? Oh yeah, you can see this is it's kind of dimming these ones, which is nice. It's not as many as it was dimming before though. Interesting. It seemed to be doing more when there was a... Oh, is it? Wait. I see. It's because once we put it into the factor, it was no longer acting as like a multiplication, but it was acting as when this right side is black, that is actually just inputting the straight principled BSD-SDF rather than the transparent. So if we do this here, now that we've swapped this white to the other side, we should see blue. Oh no. What if we like really crank that? Come on. There we go. There we go. That's what we want. What we're gonna do is we're gonna start with this value completely black. Let's just animate that position. Also animate, oops, put a keyframe on that position. And then if we can create a little timeline. Let's just go over a couple frames. Move this black over here, move this white all the way over here. Boom, boom. And then we can actually go in and take this value and kind of have it fade out. So it can start fading out here. So it starts out like this and it goes like that. Ooh, but we don't want it like that. We actually want the white to be a little bit delayed here. Let's just do it in here. Okay, that's the black. So what we actually want is, we want this black to be a little bit ahead. So there's a little bit. Bam. Alright, that should do it. While we have this here, let's also take a second to change the format that it saves in. Because I'm going to be doing some compositing stuff in Davinci Resolve. We're going to actually export as an OpenEXR multi-layer, and it's important for not to be zip lossless because that's going to be huge, but a PXR24 is generally pretty small. So we save those, we have that at 100, bada bing, bada boom. And now we can just go into here, PNGs. Let's create a new folder. We'll create this, we'll call this 1, just to make it nice. So warehouse dance 1, 0.0, 50 samples. Bada bing, bada boom. Add a space there so it has space to put the frames. And let us hit Command F12, render, and it's time to go to sleep. Whew, alrighty. See you in the morning when this is hopefully done and not crashed.